Great.
Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome in. This is FST Fantasy Sports Today. Wildcard weekend in full swing. So many people out there still glued to every single snap. I'm Matt Striker, I'm one of them, but of course, the glue, the whole thing comes together because of this man, Joe Pisapia. And Joe, lots to unpack based off of what has already happened, what it means for what's going to happen. So with that said, welcome. Let's get started.
Yes, and one correction at the top of the show. It's Super Wild Card Weekend, Matt. I already got fined earlier in the week.
Sorry, everyone.
I forgot
so sorry. My apologies.
Yeah, I mean,
apologies.
it's not just
apologies.
a Wild Card Weekend. It's a Super
Junior,
Wild
sorry.
Card Weekend.
Sorry,
but
guys.
that's okay. You're forgiven. Everybody gets one. You've used yours in the first segment. So hopefully the next 2 hours will be okay. But yeah, what a fun night of football it was yesterday. Freezing cold conditions, not a problem for the Kansas City Chiefs, more of a problem for the Miami Dolphins as everyone expected it to go. And the emergence of a true star in the NFL, quarterback for the Houston Texans. So let's start there with the Houston Texans, C.J. Stroud, an incredible victory for the Texans at home. And let's not forget, in the first half of this game, the Texans fell behind twice. And this was a team of the Cleveland Browns that beat the pulp out of them just a few weeks ago. And this young team did not throw in the towel. They did not give up. They continued to fight. They clawed their way back. They clawed their way ahead. And then they absolutely pounded the Browns into submission. They were so far ahead in this game that Davis Mills got some work under center in the fourth quarter. That's how good things went for the Texans. And the Texans defense stepped up last night. Credit to DeMeco Ryans. Credit to C.J. Stroud. Nico Collins next year is going to be a second-round draft pick in fantasy leagues everywhere. He is going to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy next year. I have zero concerns about that. And C.J. Stroud is that guy. He is that dude. He is a stud. He is a star. He was the number 1 quarterback on our board on this show going back to March and April during our draft coverage here on FST. I know a lot of people still had Young. Some people had Anthony Richardson. Richardson might be a special guy down the road. He's got such an incredible skill set. He is so gifted athletically. But my goodness, Can we talk about C.J. Stroud being that guy? Because he absolutely has been all year for the Texans. He's been a leader on the field, off the field. Incredible performance by him last night in front of that home crowd. You could sense that crowd too. That Houston Texans crowd. Really just the years and years of pain just kind of releasing a little bit with this playoff win. And that's a great thing. And we might see more of that this weekend too as we continue on. And then, of course, Patrick Mahomes. You know, if there was ever a team and a guy that needed a week off, I think it was Patrick Mahomes. Got a little bit of a respite last week. And then they just kind of went with what's been working for them. You know, they've coalesced over Rashee Rice and Isaiah Pacheco because those are the same things that have been working the last 6 weeks of the season. So watching Rashee Rice have a huge game last night was no surprise. It's a guy we were talking about back in August, right? You got a last round pick, use it on Rice because he might be the guy who emerges, not Sky Moore, not MVS. And sure enough, if you were patient, it was Rice at the end of the day. Pacheco ran hard. The weather was a problem. And of course, we know the rest is history, as they say. Also, Matt, it's history for a few major coaches. Some of the best coaches that the league has ever seen all got assigned their walking papers, and Arthur Smith. Bill Belichick, after 24 seasons, gone from the New England Patriots. Yeah, we don't pull any punches here on FST. Not this early in the morning. It's too early for a filter, Striker. But yeah, I mean, think about this. Bill Belichick, Carroll, Vrabel, all gone. Arthur Smith gone. Ron Rivera gone. Mm-hmm. So a big turnover and possibly more to come as, you know, the week goes on. You never know how these things are going to go. Now, the New England Patriots didn't waste any time. Gerard Mayo is the new head coach of the New England Patriots. He had it built into his deal. A little surprising by me because I thought Vrabel, with his track record, might get that opportunity. But it is. But look, Mayo also a great fit for the culture. I mean, this could be a very similar situation to what happened with Bill Cowher passing the reins off to Mike Tomlin, who at the time, again, Tomlin, a very thought-after young coach, didn't have head coaching experience, but he's done pretty well for himself. So Mayo could be next in that line, and the players love him. So that's a good start there. So we'll see if Mayo and this new regime can kind of turn things back towards the dynasty years of the Patriots, which we'll never see again. Bill Belichick won 17 division titles in 24 years. Bill Belichick went to 9 Super Bowls. He won 6 as a head coach to as a coordinator.
Jeez.
So let's not forget, people can talk about Tom Brady, and Tom Brady is absolutely probably the biggest reason he won all those Super Bowls.
Agreed.
But at the same time, you have to have the coaches. You have to have the guys who can coach great players. Because if you look at Phil Jackson, right, people had trouble winning with Shaquille O'Neal until Phil Jackson showed up into town. So great players need great coaches. It goes hand in hand often a lot. So your thoughts on the changing of the guard, Matt, in the NFL at the head coaching position, because there's been a lot of change in a short period of time this week.
Well, I think it's the right question to ask, pardon me, and it kind of chokes me up. And this is the show to have this conversation, because what does it mean for the way offenses are going to go? What does it mean for the way defensive schemes are going to look? What is it going to mean for the rest of the league? The entire season, Joe and I have been talking about the young quarterback and how we should draft based off that. Well, as wagerers, let's look at the head of the snake, if you will, and see, with all these coaches leaving, the mindsets leaving, all this new mindset coming in, how do we get ahead of the curve? Remember, it's smarter to be on SportsGrid, right? It's not just a slogan. How do we get ahead of the curve, Joe, and find that wagering vacuum that we can take advantage of before everyone catches up? That's the first thing I think of when I see all of the changes with regards to coaching. And then the next thing would be, what happened with the Texans? At what point in the game did they realize something? What was it? Because when you take them out of that element, I wonder what they're going to be like, because something happened in that game from a coaching perspective. They saw something and they exploited it egregiously. Do you agree?
Mm-hmm. I do. And I think it was the defense that, stepped up, forced Joe Flacco into that first interception and then the pick six. And I think that was the moment to me where you felt like, all right, the Texans defense is now ready to, really show up in this game. And they did. And the rest of the game, they absolutely did. Now, they struggled with David Njoku, but it seems like everybody struggled with David Njoku this year once Joe Flacco showed up. Who'd have thought it would have taken Joe Flacco to unlock David Njoku all these years that we've been waiting for David Njoku to become a thing in the NFL? So we'll see if it carries over next year, depending on who the quarterback is. But to your question, yeah, I think there was a moment in that game, I told you, they fell behind not once, but twice in the first half. And young teams, are going to do one or two things. They're either going to fold up the tents because the pressure's too much, or they're going to not care because they're a young team and they don't know any better. And I think that's what the Houston Texans, in a way, had going for them. The inexperience, in a way, they actually had going for them in this game, because I don't think they felt a lot of pressure. They were at home. Nobody expected them to be there. And nobody really, I think a lot of people didn't expect, them to beat the Browns necessarily. So they had that going for them, and they'll have that going for them in the next round, and we'll see how far they can go. It's a great story. No matter what happens in the next round of the division round of the playoffs, the Houston Texans have been a phenomenal story. DeMeco Ryans, young head coach, who's going to be there a long time. He's got the franchise QB. And this is how important the draft is. And to your other question about coaches, this kind of ties in. Because if you look at the organizations that have whiffed on picks, right? You look at the Carolina Panthers, who have high picks, right? They didn't take Aiden Hutchinson. They took Bryce Young instead of taking C.J. Stroud. These are the decisions that make the most impact on your organization. The Houston Texans, in one draft, took C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson, a leader on offense, a leader on defense, great players in their own right, but great leaders on and off the field. And it made a difference yesterday. Also today, another great narrative, Goff versus Stafford, old QBs, new places. We're going to talk a whole lot of this game today on FST.
Fun to do, because you could kind of, place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting. But New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, a Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
And the New York Knicks has one of the easiest schedules the rest of the way. If you look at a site like Tankathon, the Knicks have right now the 20th easiest schedule the rest of the way. Folks, they're 2.5 games behind Philadelphia. Philadelphia's starting to slip a little bit. I don't think the Knicks get to 3, but they should be a top 6 team in the Eastern Conference.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
You have sat down with Nick Saban for a lengthy interview. You have spoken to Nick Saban multiple times throughout his career. How surprised were you?
I mean, he's not going anywhere, I don't believe. And at the end of the day, very surprised. Athletic department surprised. Talked to a few people, Alabama folks, late last night, early this morning. Very surprised. Didn't see it coming.
The Early Line. Only on SportsGrid.
Bills going on the road to Miami Gardens, knocking off the Dolphins as 3-point favorites. They win it 21-14.
You want to lose like the Falcons did today, 48-17? That's probably bothersome. You want to win an ugly game where you throw 3 picks, but you end up winning the division? No one cares. Ain't nobody going to be talking about interceptions in the end zone tomorrow. You know what they're talking about? Hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers next weekend in the playoffs.
Football Full Circle. Only on SportsGrid. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. Your 24/7 sports wagering network.
We'll look at the Heisman Trophy
The Early
race
Line.
and what it all means. Individual success.
You should have tried to get something for Anthony Rendon, not bought at the deadline.
Newswire.
We're getting a lot of news, trades, cuts, and some movement in terms of starting quarterback,
Pharrell
backup quarterback.
Coast to Coast.
I want to watch great players make buckets and win games.
Game time decisions.
I have no idea what the heck the Blazers are doing and what they
In-game live.
Just
Prime
took 'em
time.
yard for a grand slam.
The bottom of the 4th inning in a 12-2 baseball game. We got football scores going on at Wrigley right now.
Sports Rage
That was
Late
good betting.
Night.
We waited for 1.5. We got paid.
We did.
Didn't like the 2.5. Jumped on
There's
it.
no taking weeks off in golf betting ever. These are the best weeks to bet.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
All right, welcome back in FST Fantasy Sports Today. I'm Matt Striker. He's Joe Pisapia. Some quick house cleaning, just so you know. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff here, giving you a lot of information. Want to help you out at SportsGrid and at SportsGrid TV. If you are new to the show or you haven't done it yet, follow us on social media. It just makes absorbing a lot of this content that Joe is going to go through just a lot easier. Put it in your pocket, take us with you wherever you go. Just act on it in a timely fashion, because you're not the only person to whom I'm speaking and telling about social media and the app as well. If you really want to get ahead of the game, you'll have those things working in tandem. With that said, I'm about to tag into my man, Joe Pisapia, the author of the Fantasy Black Book series. And what that has done is change the way we value players, Joe. And I love what you've done with it. So, DFS, this is the way we're going to make some cake along with some straight up wagering today. So let's start building lineups, and we'll start with the running back position. And we'll start with a game where I think this team is winning. I do. I think, what are they? -3, maybe, something to that effect. Kyron Williams in the Rams is 9 even on FanDuel. I think there's a big day coming, but what says you?
Yeah, I do too. The Detroit Lions defense has struggled, but you have to give them respect because against the run, they have been very good this year. They are actually ranked 2nd overall against the rush. And Kyron Williams has had a really good end to the season. I mean, if you think about the last 6 weeks or so coming in through week 12, this is a guy who's put up 143 yards in the game, 88, 114, 152, 104, and 87. He is averaging somewhere around 22 carries a game. And I think this is a very important thing because the volume's there. The quality of the volume's there. He doesn't share the backfield with anybody. He's been that guy. And Kyron Williams has done everything the Rams have asked of him. The Sean McVay offense has played very well under Matthew Stafford. And the offensive line, to its credit, have opened some holes there for Kyron Williams. And Kyron Williams runs strong. Kyron Williams is not afraid to be physical. He can also catch the ball in the backfield, so he can get your points in lots of different ways. But this is a really huge game with some giant narratives in it because Jared Goff, the former quarterback of the Rams, who was replaced by Matthew Stafford, former quarterback of the Detroit Lions. Stafford leaves Detroit, goes to L.A. with McVay. And it looks like McVay was right because he won the Super Bowl the next year, right? Now we turn around a few years later, and here they are in the playoffs facing each other. And if there's anybody that knows, I think, the deficiencies of Jared Goff inside and out and the weaknesses of Jared Goff, it has to be Sean McVay, because he spent so much time with him, trying to work with him, getting him to where he got to. So this is going to be a fascinating statement, I think, for both of these quarterbacks in this game. And I'm kind of where you are, where I believe that the Rams are the team that's going to advance from this contest. I think Detroit the fans are going to show up. It's going to be a loud area there. It's going to be very energetic there. But at the same time, I'm looking at Matthew Stafford and the way this Rams offense has played down the stretch, and the defense too, starting to get after the quarterback. I think the Rams are going to give them all to handle, and they have struggled in the secondary, and that's a bad thing. But going back to Kyren Williams specifically, he's that number one guy on that board. Now, he is expensive, so you have to make a choice basically today, especially since, we have this game that Buffalo got moved to tomorrow. The slate that we're talking about is that wraparound slate from Sunday to Monday, so everything's been changed around, but still, it doesn't matter. The same games are going to be on there. So if you want Kyren Williams in your lineup, you have to make a choice. It's either Kyren Williams or it's CeeDee Lamb. I'm making the Lamb choice because I want to go with some of the receivers in this game because I think that's my way to go. But you can't argue against Kyren Williams because Kyren has been so solid. The volume, the quality of volume, everything has been there for Kyren Williams. And I'm like you, between the total of this game being high and I think my expectations for the Rams being high, Kyren Williams is going to have a good day today.
All right. I like it. And I like that you've given some food for thought. And it's something that you always do because it makes the ensuing conversations that much easier. I got to tell you, man, it's a pleasure. All right. So if people are off Williams, let's pivot to another team that is poised to step into the spotlight because I think their opponents are reeling. I think they have their wings up trying to defend. Rachaad White from the Bucs, 7,700 on FanDuel. That is a nice price considering we just talked about 9 even on FanDuel. Is this a better matchup? Can I make more lineups? Does this unlock anything, Joe?
Well, look, I don't love this game tomorrow night, to be honest with you. Like, this is a game I'm much more invested in the Cowboys and Green Bay Packers game, much more invested in anything at Ford Field because the totals all year long at Ford Field have been overs for the most part. I mean, the Lions secondary is the gift that keeps on giving typically, and I expect a shootout there. So when you have a game where you have a lot of question marks there, AJ Brown, we're going to talk about later, he's out for this game. Devonta Smith's health, even Jalen Hurts' health, and then on the flip side of this game, you have Baker Mayfield, who is coming up lame with that ankle injury. He's fine, he's going to play, but still, how good is he? That's the big question. And Rachaad White's somebody who has been really steady, and I think he gets relied upon heavily in this game. Now, the Eagles' defense is 10th against the rush, so they're still pretty good up front, but they're 31st against the pass. And I think that's where Rachaad White's going to get a lot of action here. If you look at Rachaad White's stats over in the year, he had 64 receptions this year. That was good enough to make him in half-point PPR, RB5 on the season. That's nothing to sneeze at. I mean, that is a tremendous return on investment for a player who is going as an RB2 in most drafts. And here we come today over on the FanDuel price, and I think it's a really good, solid value return on investment. Now, there's some other running backs I prefer. They're a little bit cheaper, especially under the circumstances that they're going to be playing in, but Rachaad White is going to see probably at least 4 to 5 targets in this game, if not more. And I think the way you beat the Eagles is just to continuously attack that secondary. That's what you do in every way you can. So don't run up against the brick wall. Get Rachaad White out in space. Get him catching the football. And I think if you do those things, all of a sudden Rachaad White's in a really good spot to return this value over on FanDuel today, or should I say tomorrow in the wraparound slate. And I think that that's something you can take to the bank. And Rachaad White, one of the better stories in fantasy this year, because I think a lot of people at most thought he'd probably be an empty volume guy and it'd be okay. When he finishes a top 5 back in fantasy, that's more than okay. And I know we had our attrition of injuries at running back. We always do. But give credit to Rachaad White because the stats at the end of the year were there. 990 yards rushing, 9 touchdowns, 549 yards receiving. That's a pretty good season for a guy who had middle expectations at best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you give the wrinkle of pay attention to the props for White with regards to targets, receptions, receiving yards. A lot of people just think so, I guess, myopically or small when it comes to running back. Realize how the game is changing, how offenses are changing, and how these types of things work in favor, especially against a team like the Eagles that you mentioned, who are 31st against the pass. Yeah, you need to exploit that. All right, so 7,400 is the next tier, 7,400 on FanDuel, and it's the tag on Jahmyr Gibbs. from the Lions.
All right, Jameer.
Joe, what do you think Gibbs's results are going to be today?
Yeah, I think Gibbs, just like Rachaad White's going to work a lot out of the passing game today. Now, I know the last two games, a little quieter for him. You have to go back to that game against Minnesota on Christmas weekend where he had 22 points. It was a big one, but before that, 23 points. So last two games, just, somewhere averaging around 14 carries, 35 yards. That's not great necessarily for Gibbs, but I think what I want to do is push this even lower. Because, again, I want to get up and make sure that I've got CeeDee Lamb. I want to make sure that I've got some of these bigger wide receivers like Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp today, or even Amon-Ra St. Brown, which means the next tier of running back, Aaron Jones, who might finally be healthy here for the Green Bay Packers. That's what it seems like anyway. And I think that's where we have to look here. $7K is a really good price for him. It's, the Dallas Cowboys defense is very good, but they're middling against the run. So that's one thing. If you look at the last 2 weeks here, it's the first time we've seen Aaron Jones healthy in a very long time these last few weeks, and it shows because against Carolina, 21 carries for 127. Against Minnesota, 20 carries for 120. And then last week against the Chicago Bears, 22 carries for 111. If you're talking about getting the best bang for your buck, it's absolutely 100% Aaron Jones. In fact, I have a hard time making any DFS lineup without Aaron Jones, and I'd be looking for the overs on Jones. And the last guy, too, might surprise you, but I think it's Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Harris is 6,500 on FanDuel. He has the opportunity to get a lot of workload. The weather is obviously going to be an issue there. It's going to be cold. It's Buffalo. But I think the trick is to keep feeding him the football, grind down this clock, keep Josh Allen off the field. And if you could do that long enough, Najee Harris is going to be the beneficiary. We come back, a look at the quarterbacks today. How are they going to do and who should we roster? We'll tell you right after this.
Fun to do because you could kind of, place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting. But New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, a Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
And the New York Knicks has one of the easiest schedules the rest of the way. If you look at a site like Tankathon, the Knicks have right now the 20th easiest schedule the rest of the way. Folks, they're 2.5 games behind Philadelphia. Philadelphia's starting to slip a little bit. I don't think the Knicks get to 3, but they should be a top 16 in the Eastern Conference.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
You have sat down with Nick Saban for a lengthy interview. You have spoken to Nick Saban multiple times throughout his career. How surprised were you?
I mean, he's not going anywhere, I don't believe. And at the end of the day, very surprised. Athletic department surprised. Talked to a few people, Alabama folks, late last night, early this morning. Very surprised. Didn't see it coming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Bills going on the road to Miami Gardens, knocking off the Dolphins as 3-point favorites. They win it 21-14.
You want to lose like the Falcons did today, 48-17? That's probably bothersome. You want to win an ugly game where you throw 3 picks, but you end up winning the division? No one cares. Ain't nobody going to be talking about interceptions in the end zone tomorrow. You know what they're talking about? Hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers next weekend in the playoffs.
Football Full Circle, only on SportsGrid. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid, your 24/7 sports wagering network.
We'll look at the Heisman Trophy
The Early Line,
and what it all means. Individual success.
You should have tried to get something for Anthony Rendon. Not bought at the deadline.
Newswire.
We're getting a lot of news, trades, cuts, and some movement in terms of starting quarterbacks,
Pharrell,
backup quarterbacks.
coast to coast.
I want to watch great players make buckets and win games.
Game time decisions.
I have no idea what the heck the Blazers are doing and what
In-game live,
Just
prime
took 'em
time.
yard for a grand slam.
The bottom of the fourth inning in a 12-2 baseball game. We got football scores going on at Wrigley right now.
Sports Rage
That was
Late
good betting.
Night.
We waited for the 1.5. We got paid.
We
for
did.
patient, didn't like the 2.5. Jumped on
There's
it.
no taking weeks off in golf betting ever. These are the best weeks to bet.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
All right, welcome back into FST Fantasy Sports Today. My name's Matt Striker. His name's Joe Pisapia. Building DFS lineups. It's a great way to continue, A, to enjoy the sport if you're a season-long manager and it's all over for you. Great. B, continue to enrich ourselves via our love of just watching sports. Guys, gals, how many times have we been told, get off the couch, come on it? No, I'm working. I'm working right now, dear, and you must respect that. Joe, you've been putting in the work building the DFS lineups. We had the running back conversation. So now it opens up a conversation for quarterback. So let's start with the obvious, right? You talk about the wraparound slate. You want to build a nice lineup that allows you to have footing on both days. Here it is. Josh Allen is 9,300 on FanDuel. How many lineups have Josh Allen in them for you? And what does this allow us to do, if anything, Joe?
Well, this goes back to that same conversation we had about Kyron Williams, right? You got to make a decision of which high-priced guy you want here. Like, is it going to be Josh Allen? Is it going to be Kyron Williams? Or is it going to be CeeDee Lamb? And I think you have to ask yourself that question. I keep landing on CeeDee Lamb. That's where I keep going back to. But I think, a few different lineups, a few different ways is going to be a good situation anyway. The good thing with Josh Allen is, we talk about this quite a bit with Allen. He controls the points in his offense, right? In terms of fantasy points. This is a guy that had the most rushing touchdowns of any quarterback this year, 15. That's a lot. You look at what he's done here in that last game against Miami, 359 yards passing, ending on a hot note there. And I think that's very important because I think Josh Allen kind of needed that going in to the playoffs. Now, obviously the weather is going to be a factor. It's going to be cold. There is going to be some wind. But right now, looking at it, it's saying somewhere around like 16 to 17 mile an hour winds. This is not talking about gusts up to 35, 40 miles an hour here. This isn't Chad Pennington throwing the football. This is Josh Allen throwing the football, okay? So there's a reference from yesteryear. If you don't know who Chad Pennington is, look it up. Good quarterback, though. Underrated quarterback. Didn't have the biggest arm, though. But Josh Allen's going to be fine throwing the football in this. The question is, how do you want to make this all work? I think the best way to make this work with Josh Allen is to look for the cheaper pieces, right? Gabe Davis hurt, so where do we pivot to? We pivot to probably Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir. I think those are the pieces you're looking at right now. And I think that cheaper Josh Allen stack is the way to go because, frankly, Stephon Diggs has not been that guy. Diggs is not even a guy we're going to talk about because he's basically disappeared in the second half of the season. We showed you the stat of the week, I think it was last week or the week before, where Stephon Diggs just completely vanished from the psyche, from the playbook. I don't know, but it just has not happened. He's gotten targets, too, some weeks. It just hasn't come to fruition. Maybe this is the day against the Steelers secondary that isn't very good. But at the end of the day, I think Josh Allen's good for some overs. I think I'd rather be betting Josh Allen props and the over, looking for anytime touchdown or even multiple rushing touchdowns potentially for him in this game. And I think the biggest thing, too, in this game that is going to affect it is the absence of TJ Watt. Because when you don't have TJ Watt rushing into that quarterback situation, forcing Josh Allen to get rid of the football faster than he wants to or make mistakes and rush his looks, you might get a less mistake-prone Josh Allen today. And that is, or should I say tomorrow now, I still got to keep correcting myself because the game has moved. That, I think, is something that's very important because Allen sometimes does get a little crazy in these games, tries to do too much, especially if the pressure is coming on him a little bit. Without that pressure, I think Josh Allen can sit back and pick them apart. So I'd look for another big day on Josh Allen's over on the props there for his passing. Probably look for the over on the rushing and probably look for some anytime touchdown or rushing touchdown props you can get. Because I think it's going to be a big day for Josh Allen. But regardless, I think there's other places at quarterback that we can go to get our points that are a little less cost prohibitive.
Yeah, and the anytime touchdown for me, I mean, based off the return is usually the way I lean. But remember, I'm a pro wrestling guy, and you mentioned how Diggs has been mysteriously vanished over the past. By God, it's Diggs! Like, I just feel that sometimes these guys are pushed to the side purposefully when a team It sounds crazy, knows that they may be able to reveal them again later. But at 9,300, using our 3X method, is he going to return me 27 to 30 points? That's the nail biter. You keep mentioning CeeDee Lamb. Let's go to the obvious. Let's stack it with Dak Prescott. He's 8,600 on FanDuel. I think the 3X applies here. I can get there in my mind, but talk to me. Dak Prescott, Joe.
Look, Dak Prescott at home, too, who has been absolutely sensational. I mean, there's no way around this. And he's been really steady for the most part. He had that bad game in Buffalo a few weeks ago, but outside of that, 18 points, 21 points, 26 points the last 3 contests. So good situations for him. Great last one against Washington. 4 touchdowns in that game. 8,600, though, still very expensive. So once again, you're looking for one-offs here. You're going to stack them with Lamb. Okay, that's great. But then where are you looking for the other touchdowns? You going for Ferguson? Is it Rico Dowdle? Where you want to get into this game? I think this is a really interesting one, just like the Detroit one, of game stacking it and just attacking, because those are the 2 games that have the biggest totals, and I don't think they're going to fail us. I actually think both of these totals are going to live up to the hype because the way these offenses are built, and I think they're going to go and exchange blows back and forth, and I think that's what you're looking for to go over this high total. And I think that Dak Prescott especially, I think, takes this personally. Now, the Cowboys, we all know the Cowboys have had multiple failures in the last decade and plus in the playoffs. They have let a lot of people down, and they've had high expectations before. It's another great narrative game, too, where you have Mike McCarthy coaching against his old team, the Green Bay Packers, where he coached for many, many years. So a lot of fun narratives here on a super wild card Saturday. And I think that this is another one where if you want to go with CeeDee Lamb, get that Cowboy stack and just game stack this whole game, run it back with Jaden Reed or, some of the other guys there in the Green Bay Packers, like Aaron Jones, are the perfect example here that we just talked about in the last segment. I think this is one that you want to be in on. Dak Prescott, obviously a great start today. I would prefer Prescott, who is basically just a hair under Jalen Hurts' price and Josh Allen's price, a $400 difference between the 2 of them. I would absolutely pivot down to Prescott from those 2 guys this weekend.
Yeah, I like it a lot, and I agree. And based off of how much you've been mentioning CeeDee Lamb in the X minutes that we've been on the air, it makes sense. All right, I want to put these next 2 quarterbacks together because the conversation is just easier that way, and we have time. Jared Goff is 7,700 on FanDuel. Matt Stafford is 7,400 on FanDuel. What do you expect from this game? Let's write a game script and then talk about which one or both could be worth something in multiple lineups. Joe.
I think this is a game that both teams end up pushing their team totals into just around 30. And that's going to be a good day for fantasy purposes. Now, Goff to me is actually the interesting one because Goff becomes the oppo play where we're all in on Josh Allen, we're all in on Prescott, we're all in on those things, right? And it turns out to be Jared Goff at the end of the day who has the game that everybody covets and wants. Now, the big problem is the health of Sam Laporta. That's a big piece that's not healthy. And I think when you take that red zone threat away, you're going to have guys like Jameson Williams step up. You're going to have guys like Khalif Raymond step up. And they have before. They have in recent memory. So that's a good thing. You're going to see them utilize the running backs here a ton in this game, both David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs is really capable of helping to pad some of those Jared Goff stats. So to me, Goff is the oppo guy. He's the guy that nobody's really in on that much. You pair him with Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's a really easy one. And then just walk away from it. At 7,700, it's a pretty good deal. But I'm going to go a little bit further. And I'm going to go down to Matthew Stafford because that's the guy that I believe is going to really show up and show out today. The Detroit Lions are 27th against the pass. Their corners and secondary have not played well this year. I mean, it is just a fact. They have let so many teams back into games time and time again. We've seen it down the stretch too. So I understand there's going to be intensity in this game. I understand there's going to be a lot of narrative in this game. And I think Matthew Stafford is prepared for the stage of this game. This is a guy that went to the Super Bowl and won. It's not going to be too big of a stage for Matthew Stafford here. Emotional homecoming, perhaps. But at the end of the day, 7,400, and you can easily attach into Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp. I think you have to make your choices. Maybe you have a lineup where you have one pairing in one and one pairing in the other just to cover your bases. But it's hard not to like the 7,400. And when you go below this, you're giving yourself uncertainty with Baker Mayfield or Mason Rudolph, and I don't think that's the way to go either. So the quarterback position for me this particular wildcard weekend, I think Stafford is the best return on investment you can have. And if you look at the numbers that Stafford's been putting up here, you look at the amount of passing volume in this offense, he's had games here recently, 41, 37, 33, 34, 34 pass attempts. That's a lot of pass attempts. He's had games with at least 2 touchdowns in 5 of the last 6 contests as well. So Matthew Stafford is on a roll. His price is much less than the other guys, but I think his productivity is right there in lockstep with the rest of them. Less rushing equity, less touchdown rushing equity, obviously, than Josh Allen. That's the only difference. So give me Stafford this weekend. That's the guy that I want.
Dynamite work, as always. I'm hanging on your every word. I want to hear more. Let's talk about the tight end play now. We were, in my mind at least, building a stack with Prescott and Lamb. Can we throw Jake Ferguson in there at 6,200 on FanDuel, or do you play him naked? What are your thoughts here?
Well, Ferguson is one of those guys that I think helps potentially unlock if you want to go a different route. Like, let's say CeeDee Lamb has a great game, but he doesn't get in the end zone for some reason, right? Like he gets tackled at the 2. Then you're looking at guys like Jake Ferguson who might have a better day than you realize. I think that's 6,200, a price that's worth it. He is not all the way up, where Laporta was at 7K, but with his injury, I think it's really tricky. Dallas Goedert, I think, is in play too, especially now that A.J. Brown is out. I think a lot of people are going to realize how much they're going to have to rely on somebody else here. And I think that somebody else might be Dallas Goedert at 6,100. And then Dalton Kincaid is the other guy that we discussed earlier when you're trying to pair somebody else with Josh Allen. And you're going to need some salary relief. So rather than going to Diggs, which frankly has just been burning money, like you're just lighting it on fire for the last 2 months, don't do it. Let's take a shot on Kincaid. You can even take a shot on Dawson Knox if you really just want to play for that touchdown. I don't think that's stupid either because he's 5K and he'll help unlock a lot. So when you're looking at the tight ends, I think you're definitely looking at guys like Kincaid, guys like Goddard, guys like Ferguson, but don't dismiss the guys like Dawson Knox or potentially even a Tucker Kraft or even a Pat Freiermuth. If they just get in the end zone, they can return value at their salary, and those cheaper guys allow you to go up the board at QB, at wide receiver, and at running back. Speaking of wide receiver, I'm going to break those guys down for you. We return right here on SportsGrid. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this.
Of fun to do because you could kind of, place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting. But New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
And the New York Knicks has one of the easiest schedules the rest of the way. If you look at a site like Tankathon, the Knicks have right now the 20th easiest schedule the rest of the way. Folks, they're 2.5 games behind Philadelphia. Philadelphia's starting to slip a little bit. I don't think the Knicks get to 3, but they should be a top 16 in the Eastern Conference.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
You have sat down with Nick Saban for a lengthy interview. You have spoken to Nick Saban multiple times throughout his career. How surprised were you?
I mean, he's not going anywhere, I don't believe. And at the end of the day, very surprised. Athletic department surprised. Talked to a few people, Alabama folks, late last night, early this morning. Very surprised. Didn't see it coming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Bills going on the road to Miami Gardens, knocking off the Dolphins as 3-point favorites. They win it 21-14.
You want to lose like the Falcons did today, 48-17? That's probably bothersome. You want to win an ugly game where you throw 3 picks, but you end up winning the division? No one cares. Ain't nobody going to be talking about interceptions in the end zone tomorrow. You know what they're talking about? Hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers next weekend in the playoffs.
Football Full Circle, only on SportsGrid. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid, your 24/7 sports wagering network.
We'll look at the Heisman Trophy
The Early
race
Line.
and what it all means. Individual success.
You should have tried to get something for Anthony Rendon, not bought at the deadline.
Newswire.
We're getting a lot of news, trades, cuts, and some movement in terms of starting quarterbacks, backup
Pharrell
quarterbacks.
Coast to Coast.
I want to watch great players make buckets, and win games.
Game time
'Cause I have
decisions.
no idea what the heck the Blazers are doing and what they
In-game live.
Just
Prime
took 'em
time.
yard for a grand slam.
The bottom of the fourth inning in a 12-2 baseball game. We got football scores going on at Wrigley right now.
Sports Rage
That was good
Late
betting.
Night.
We waited for 1.5. We got paid.
We did.
Patient, didn't like the 2.5. Jumped on
There's
it.
no taking weeks off in golf betting ever. These are the best weeks to bet.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back into FST Fantasy Sports today. My name is Matt. His name is Joe. He is my buddy. When he's happy, I'm happy, and love makes the world go around, and I love what we're about to do. Joe, you've been talking about CeeDee Lamb for the better part of nearly an hour now. So let's build the DFS lineups. We've done the running backs. We've done the quarterbacks. Here it is. The stage is set. Wide receivers. Lamb is sitting at, are you ready? 10,000 even on FanDuel. How many lineups have Lamb? Why? Joe, go.
All of them. 9 of the last 10 games. Well, I mean, 9 of the last 10 games, he got double-digit targets, right? When you're looking at the amount of touchdowns he has in those games, it's absurd. The overall view, he's the number one wide receiver in fantasy this year. 1,749 receiving yards, 14 touchdowns. They're at home, more to the point, too, where they have done the most damage, where he has had his biggest games. And frankly, let's be honest here. The secondary for the Green Bay Packers is not good. Jair Alexander is not the player he used to be, not to mention he seems to be having a lot of issues here with the team and the team having a lot of issues with him. Look, there's no scenario for me where I don't want CeeDee Lamb in my lineups this week. And I understand that, the prop market's gotten really difficult with him because everything is so high and the expectations are so high, but I don't care. The Dallas Cowboys have a lot to prove, and they know that. That's not lost on them. And they know that that's been something that they've been having these things thrown at them all year, and they did fail once or twice. I think it was a failure to go into Miami on the road. Clearly, that's the only team that Miami punched up in all year long, and it was the Dallas Cowboys. So a lot of people still hate on the Cowboys, and I get it. I understand why. But if you look at what this guy's done, I mean, it's just been spectacular. He's given you the touchdowns. He's given you everything you could possibly imagine in terms of the volume. In the full PPR, if you're playing over on DraftKings today, again, you can go roster him there. It's very expensive. But this is why you have to get salary relief somewhere else. This is why going down to Matthew Stafford makes sense, because you're still getting points from your quarterback productivity, right? Can I get 25 points from Matthew Stafford? Yes. Can I get the same points from Dak Prescott? Yeah, but it's going to cost me over $1,000 more to do it. That's why I keep pivoting down to Stafford. And instead of pairing Dak Prescott with CeeDee Lamb, I'm just trying to maximize each spot I possibly can because my options are limited. I don't have all these other games available to me with all these other players that I could cherry pick. Maybe you start cherry picking, like I said, the Dawson Knoxes of the world, or even the Cade Ottens of the world. These one-off guys, perhaps even Dallas Goedert at tight end. That helps offset some of the price here. But overall, wide receiver is expensive this weekend. And I think there's only a finite number of guys that you really become interested in. One of them is CeeDee Lamb. It's the guys in Los Angeles, and it's Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's the next guy we're going to talk about, because Amon-Ra St. Brown is right there behind CeeDee Lamb in terms of desirability. You can't really get both of them. I mean, you can, but I don't know if you can get enough floor in the rest of your lineup to do it this week. I've struggled to do that. You can, but you're probably going to have to go down to the Baker Mayfield run of quarterback, and I just don't know if I'm comfortable doing that quite yet. 1,500 yards in the season for Amon-Ra St. Brown. He finishes wide receiver 3.5 point PPR. He had 10 touchdowns this year, another spectacular season for him. And I think going into next year, it's hard not to think of Amon-Ra St. Brown as a top 8 player potentially in fantasy. I think he was undervalued this year. And if you look at what he's done the first 3 seasons, I think, the first 2 years he only had 6 touchdowns. This 10 touchdown performance from him this season, and the addition of Sam Laporta in this offense where you have to worry about somebody else besides Amon-Ra, has really helped Amon-Ra St. Brown step it up to the next level. So he had 400 more receiving yards this year than last year. He had 4 more touchdowns this year than last year. So you're seeing a guy that really went from being that 1A tier, like really strong number 1 to, okay, he's elite now. And I think you're going to see a lot of this changeover. You know, the Devontae Adams of the world, the Stephon Diggs of the world, the guys that we talked about fading at the beginning of this season. Yeah, they had some moments, but it's the Amon-Ra St. Browns of the world that are really going to get ready. Next year, it's going to be the Nico Collins of the world, too. There's going to be a whole new group of names that you're going to have to get familiar with as super elite. And I think those two guys are. So putting it to you this way, if you have the board to yourself here, you have $1,000 difference between Amon-Ra St. Brown and CeeDee Lamb. Which way do you go, Matt? Because you can make the argument for both. I'm going to pay up for Lamb because he's had some just spectacular days. And I am concerned a little bit, just a little bit, about Sean McVay understanding the weaknesses of Jared Goff and possibly exploiting them. And that is, to me, the difference maker between those two. But is there a difference maker to you on these two elite wide receivers?
I stand on the same ground as you. The only deterrent for me would be the price point. And a lot of times I get into the muck of convincing myself, hey, I'm a smart and savvy lineup builder. I can have Prescott and Lamb. And then I just waste 15 minutes trying. So I think you're right. And a smart man once told me, you can be right or you can be different. I'd much rather be right. So I'm leaning Lamb for that reason, as well as the fact that you mentioned matchups as well. Whose mind is on the other side of that field? And you brought up a great point there as well. But I will try to find a way to have multiple lineups as I always do, but I just feel more confident at the price point and the return on Lamb. But it extends to the next question back to you. I return serve. Mike Evans at 8,400 on FanDuel. Questions about Mayfield, questions about all these different things. How many lineups have Mike Evans in at this price point for you today?
Yeah, the Mike Evans ones is a tricky one because the last 2 weeks have not been great, right? And they were good matchups too. So that's, kind of been the MO for Mike Evans. And we thought he would smash against Carolina. Now we can all say that the Baker Mayfield injury was a big reason that did not happen. He had 8 targets in that game, only caught 3 of them for 22 yards, 3.7 points. Not good. No bueno. The week before that, 3 catches for 70 yards, better, but no touchdown. So you have to go back to the weekend against Jacksonville on Christmas weekend where he had the 7 catches for 86 and 2 touchdowns. He is in this elite pricing tier. This is where I would rather go up to Amon-Ra St. Brown, play the volume game with him. He has just as much touchdown equity as Mike Evans. It's going to cost me a little bit more, but I have a better situation in terms of game total. Now, the thing you like so much about Mike Evans this week is definitely the matchup, because if you look at that Eagles secondary, they have been terrible this year. They are ranked 31st against the pass this year. So on paper, this should work. It's just a question of, can Baker Mayfield show up in a big spot? That's a question mark. This is a high pressure situation. Baker Mayfield did that in college, but on the pros, he has not exactly followed through with that. And I think you can get a little gun shy. I think you can get a little cold feet after watching these last 2 weeks where Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had this division in hand. All they had to do was put their foot on the gas, and they struggled to do that. They finally did in that last game, but again, the injury to Baker Mayfield is a little potentially concerning. I do think they are going to beat the Eagles. I like Tampa on the money line in this game. However, we're talking now about Mike Evans at the $8,400 price point. A few months ago, he was at $7,400 when we talked about loving Mike Evans all the time. It's a big difference. It's a big jump. So for me, if I'm going to go all the way up that high, I might as well go up into the $600 and get myself Amon-Ra St. Brown. And to me, that's my pivot point. That's what or I want to go a little bit below that and talk about some of the guys and roster of the guys we're going to talk about next here on the program.
Ooh, you see what he did there, folks? I like working with a professional. About time we classed.
I tried.
All right, here we go. Puka Nacua is 8 even on FanDuel. Cooper Kupp is 7,500 on FanDuel. I'll do bad journalism and give you 2 questions. One, do you advise trying to get both of them in the lineup? Second, is there one that you like more than the other, Joe?
The getting them both in the lineup thing is a little dicey because I love the 2 questions at once. My brain can handle the 2 questions. Typically, it's not been both of them. There was not a game all season where they both went over 100 yards. So that's the problem. Now, this could be the game, right? Maybe that's how you're different this week, right? You just go, you know what? Going to go straight for it. All the Rams, give me Puka Nacua. give me Cooper Kupp. Let's get all of them in the lineup with Stafford. Stafford goes nuts, and that's the way we're different, and it hits, right? It's a good way of looking at it. But then you have to fade away from Amon-Ra. You have to fade away from CeeDee Lamb, and I don't know if I'm willing to do that either. So I'd rather just pick one and then, again, do another lineup with the other one. And in terms of price, they're not that far off. Now, Puka Nacua is higher up there. He is $8K. Cooper Kupp is $7,500. So they are pretty close in price. You can make the argument for Cooper Kupp because for $500 less, why not Cooper Kupp? You're also getting an extra week of rest here for Cooper Kupp, which I think is really crucial for him. He was inactive last week against the 49ers. Everybody expected that to be the case. He has dealt with a myriad of injuries over the year. However, going into that last week where he did not play, he did have a touchdown in 4 of his last 5 games. Now, that's something that's trending in the good direction. The only problem is Puka Nacua, you can argue, was even better than him down the stretch here towards the end. He's had some monster games, 164 yards receiving against the Saints, 118 against the New York Football Giants there. And he has had a touchdown in 2 of his last 3 games. So I don't think there's a wrong answer. It's just a matter of you're probably running multiple lineups. If you want to have one Puka lineup, one Cooper Kupp, and then one with both, I ain't mad at it. I think it's a really good idea to have the different exposures, but I think exposure to that Rams offense is crucial today. I think they were a really good return on investment. And if Matthew Stafford's a quarterback I like, and it allows me to get CeeDee Lamb and one of these Rams wide receivers, to me, that's the core that I want to build with and fade away from some of the other high-priced things on the slate, like Mike Evans. Amon-Ra St. Brown is great, but again, you're going to have all these combinations. Something's got to give somewhere. You can't get all these guys in a lineup, unfortunately. That's what makes it a challenge. So you're going to have to look for some interesting flex plays. Again, I keep mentioning guys like Rico Dowdle. Jameson Williams is another guy, too, where, with the Sam Laporta injury, maybe you look for there. You might even say maybe a Brock Wright, tight end for the Detroit Lions, but he's hurt, too. So it's really tough to pinpoint where you might pivot down. But there are a few lower-cost wide receivers that I think do come into play this week that I think can have good returns on investment.
All right, with the time that we have left, let's talk about Jayden Reed. He's 7 even on FanDuel, and then expand that conversation into, again, further what you expect from that game. But talk about Reed at 7 even on FanDuel, please.
Jayden Reed's been a guy that's just had a tremendous amount of touchdown equity all season, and he has been, I think, steadier than people realize. I think a lot of people picked him up in fantasy, and we were very pleased that they did. He was a player that we talked about at length many times here on the show, of a guy that really was emerging in the absence of Christian Watson with all his injuries. He finished as wide receiver 28 in full point PPR this year, but the guy had 10 touchdowns this season. And he had a string of touchdowns there where he only didn't score 2 times since week 10. Take that into account again. Since week 10, he has found the end zone in every single game but 2. So Jayden Reed is a great way to run back, again, that Dallas offense, right? So you're going to go ahead, you're going to get pieces like Jayden Reed, like Aaron Jones, and then you're going to run it back with CeeDee Lamb, maybe even a Ferguson if you want to go that route. If you want to get Dak or Jordan Love, that's fine too. Those guys are all in play. So I think game stacking these 2 games in particular with some little pieces here and there from what you're going to see between Buffalo and Pittsburgh, like the Najee Harris piece we talked about, maybe even a Freiermuth piece. And then obviously in that other game, looking at guys like Dallas Goedert, or even if it's not Mike Evans, looking at Chris Godwin, a guy who is a high volume wide receiver. It is a bad secondary. So if you want to try to attack that secondary, but you don't want to pay the cost of Mike Evans, maybe you pivot down instead to Chris Godwin. You take the PPR style points, especially in DK, as an interesting pivot as well. So there's ways to get in there, but it is tough right now outside of, again, the one-offs like Jameson Williams, where you kind of need that big splash play. He's just 5,200. He is in play. Khalif Raymond, another guy, you need the splash play. He is in play, but you need that one big moment to happen. If it doesn't, those guys could fall short. So an interesting puzzle to put together in Wild Card Weekend. We return. A stat that will blow your mind.
Fun to do because you could kind of, place a season-long bet all at once and just wait it out. I've always found that interesting. But New York is one state where it's a little bit unclear.
You cannot bet on basically anything that requires a vote. So you're talking about an MVP award, a Cy Young, Rookie of the Year, anything where people at the end of the year have to vote.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
And the New York Knicks has one of the easiest schedules the rest of the way. If you look at a site like Tankathon, the Knicks have right now the 20th easiest schedule the rest of the way. Folks, they're 2.5 games behind Philadelphia. Philadelphia's starting to slip a little bit. I don't think the Knicks get to 3, but they should be a top 6 team in the Eastern Conference.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
You have sat down with Nick Saban for a lengthy interview. You have spoken to Nick Saban multiple times throughout his career. How surprised were you?
I mean, he's not going anywhere, I don't believe. And at the end of the day, very surprised. Athletic department surprised. Talked to a few people, Alabama folks, late last night, early this morning. Very surprised. Didn't see it coming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Bills going on the road to Miami Gardens, knocking off the Dolphins as 3-point favorites. They win it 21-14.
You want to lose like the Falcons did today, 48-17? That's probably bothersome. You want to win an ugly game where you throw 3 picks, but you end up winning the division? No one cares. Ain't nobody going to be talking about interceptions in the end zone tomorrow. You know what they're talking about? Hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers next weekend in the playoffs.
Football Full Circle, only on SportsGrid. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid, your 24/7 sports wagering network.
We'll look at the Heisman Trophy
The Early
race
Line.
and what it all means. Individual success.
You should have tried to get something for Anthony Rendon, not bought at the deadline.
Newswire.
We're getting a lot of news, trades, cuts, and some movement in terms of starting quarterbacks,
Pharrell
backup quarterbacks.
coast to coast.
I want to watch great players make buckets and win games.
Game time
You
decisions.
have no idea what the heck the Blazers are doing and what they
In-game live.
Just
Prime
took 'em
time.
yard for a grand slam.
The bottom of the 4th inning in a 12-2 baseball game. We got football scores going on at Wrigley right now.
Sports Rage
That was good
Late
betting.
Night.
We waited for 1.5. We got paid.
We did.
Didn't like the 2.5. Jumped on
There's
it.
no taking weeks off in golf betting ever. These are the best weeks to bet.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
All right, welcome back into FST Fantasy Sports Today. Matt Striker and Joe Pisapia with you here. We've done the yeoman's work. We've built the DFS lineups. It is time now for the stat of the day, but I just want to put this out there. During the break, Joe was mentioning, huge wrestling fan, has a great show called In This Ring. But Joe was mentioning he was watching an old WWE Royal Rumble where he saw an old friend of his, and Joe posited out loud that he would make a great manager and also wouldn't mind getting knocked around a little bit. So I put this out to social media. Would you like to see Joe Pisapia in a wrestling ring taking a bump or two? Let us know. With that said, Joe, stat of the day?
See, idiots think that they say things like, I could take a bump. I did it for 20 years as a fight director and a fight choreographer. I actually know what it takes. So therefore, when I say it, it carries weight because I know what it's like to do those things. And we were falling on hardwood floors of stages and a lot of other things like that, my friend. So I'm up for the task, not just saying it like some fake tough guy. Matt Striker knows it. One thing I don't abide by, it's a fake tough guy. And a real tough guy is Tom Brady. And we're having a playoff without Tom Brady, and that doesn't feel right to me. So let's have a stat about Tom Brady. You ready for this one? Buckle your seatbelts, kids. In Tom Brady's NFL career, he never once took a snap in a game at which time his team was eliminated from playoff contention. Let that soak in. Not one time in his NFL career did he take a snap.
Accurate? Have
Well,
we
because the
verified
one year
this?
where the Patriots,
I gotta call BS here. Have we verified
they were
this?
not. No, this is verified. The only year that the Patriots did not make the playoffs was the year he was hurt. Remember, he tore his ACL in that first week of the season, coming off the Super Bowl loss.
That is wild.
It is wild. Now, in other words, not that they won the division, but they were still mathematically able to make the playoffs in the entirety of Tom Brady's career. Now, that also towards the end there, last year the NFC South was so bad this allowed it to happen, and they still got in. But you look around and you realize just how stunning that is, that Tom Brady was able to do that. And you want to talk about the will of a leader and a quarterback? It's Tom Brady and it's everybody else. Sorry, kids. When we come back, hour 2 of FST, we're going to kick off a lot of props, and that starts right now.